One reason people dismiss the possibility that the September 11th attack was a government operation is that they cannot believe everybody in the U.S. government would remain silent about such an incredible crime. A woman named Kay Griggs, the second wife of Marine Corps Colonel George Griggs, can help us understand why everybody is silent. Her information about the U.S. government comes from her husband, her personal observations, her husband's diary, and people she met. Even if some of her information is incorrect, the top military and political leaders of America are routinely blackmailed, bribed, threatened, and manipulated. She mentions many government officials by name, so if her accusations are false, she is making a lot of slanderous remarks about a lot of people. For example,
I found my husband's diary, which I have here, which they have been not anxious to have get out.
Now, they meaning?
General Sheehan, General Krulak, Marine Corps colonels, generals, Al Gray, Cook, and especially General Joy.
Joy.
General Jim Joy and General Carl Steiner they're evil men. And they are in this diary meeting with my husband almost every day in Beirut. They trained the men in black who killed those people in Waco.
not only does she claim that Waco was a deliberate killing, but later in the interview she says that the military knew that the Marine Corps barracks was going to be bombed in Beirut, Lebanon. That bombing occurred in 1983, and more than 200 Marines died. The official story is that the bombing was a result of Arab terrorists. She doesn't explain why the military would allow hundreds of Marines to die, so we are left to wonder if the bombing was intended to give the Marines an excuse to get out of Lebanon, or if it was intended to create anger towards Arabs. As with the September 11th attack, the Oklahoma City bombing, and the killings at Waco, it is difficult to find a sensible motive. But perhaps Kay Griggs is correct that many top government officials are under the control of criminals and lunatics. She explains that one of the methods to control government officials is to pressure them into doing unusual sexual activities, which can then be used to blackmail them. She believes that some universities have special fraternities for this purpose. For example, Princeton University has a fraternity called Cap and Gowns, which her husband belonged to. Yale University has a fraternity called Skull and Bones. Supposedly, President Bush and John Kerry were members of that fraternity. To most people, and to some of its members, these fraternities are meaningless organizations, but she believes some of them are used as recruitment centers for government officials.
George got into Cap and Gown, which is the same kind of fraternity. I mean, it's an eating club at Princeton for intelligence officers.
It's Cap and Gown. Would they have anybody involved that wasn't intelligence oriented?
Football players and so forth. But I have a feeling that Cap and Gown has a lot of intelligence officers and boys who may have been raped. Of course, they'd never talk about it.
Right.
But I know that the initiation is, they get very drunk, and even in the Marine Corps they do that. It's called dining in. They have the shellback ceremony. They do a lot of homosexual enticement. The boys are, when they come in, when they're new recruits, they strip them nude, they violate their personal parts. There's a lot of that is going on.
What about
even now?
Tailhook?
Yeah.
Is there a connection?
Yeah, sure, because the cream of the crop is doing this. they're having group sex parties.
And that was a Navy operation too, wasn't it?
Yeah.
She points out that tailhook has a double meaning.
You know what tailhook means, don't you?
No, what is tailhook? Uh-oh. I got a feeling.
Yeah.
Is it a homosexual reference?
Yeah, sure.
Really?
Sure.
Did you know that, Steve? Isn't it something?
Yeah.
And the average person on the street has no idea.
Yeah.
She accuses a Marine Corps general of being a cherry Marine.
What I want to tell you about General Al Gray, my husband was the chief of staff for General Al Gray, who was the commandant of the Marine Corps. And I probably shouldn't say this on the tape, and you all can get rid of it, but he's a homosexual.
Gray.
Gray.
Okay.
He's what they call a cherry Marine.
She then describes the initiation ceremonies in more detail and noticed that her husband is one of the sources of this information.
I mean, if this really got out, that these guys are all inducted because they've got some kind of homosexual thing on them.
Indoctrination. I mean, or induction. They have to do that.
Yeah.
They do that.
Yeah. Even
in a coffin. And it's even now coming into the military totally. The chiefs do that. They put them in the coffin. They do the bowling ball trick.
Okay, you're going to explain this. What happens when you get in the coffin? Why do you get in a coffin?
Oh, they get, when you get your eagles, that's a German thing.
Okay.
You know, it's what the German high command did, and most of them, you know, had the boyfriends and stuff, the Krupps and all of that. It is a German thing that they say goes back to Greece, and it's all the male Marine-looking men that they do it with. See? So now the chiefs have to do that. What they do is George said it's like a zoo. They get everybody really drunk, and they sometimes call it dining in. Shellback is another time that they do it. Not everybody does it, but the ones who do it, if they're young, they get right up to the top. It's a...
Okay, well, what actually do they do? They've got a coffin, they get inside
anal
this...
sex. That. They put them in the coffin and they do things.
Okay, they perform things on each other?
Yeah, while they're all around there going drunk.
I see. So there's a guy in the coffin.
Yeah, and he's the one who
is the recipient of all the acts.
Right, right.
Yeah. Probably safe to conclude these are oral sex acts on this guy or something like that. Okay.
Yeah, oral and anal, whatever.
Yeah.
But
what's the significance of the coffin?
I don't know.
Although she never explained what the bowling ball trick is, you should ask yourself, would a top military official, or any other man, tell his wife that he was pressured into joining these bizarre ceremonies if they were not true? Not every man in the military is enthusiastic about homosexual sex, so there are also orgies with women.
These orgies are going on all over the Mediterranean, that the captains, lieutenants, the men who rise to the top are the ones who are picked to play the games, the pool parties, the nude pool parties. And they have secretaries who come in. I've talked to 3 guys, and of course my husband, who went to these parties. But what they do is, and this is General Al Gray, who was the main prime mover, they would go to a place like Aix-les-Rosés, where Charles Caddock, this teacher who inducted, got my husband into it, he retired in one of these all-male party houses on the Mediterranean. I mean, that's where and my husband kept up with him all through the years.
But these sex parties and orgies, they're all homosexual in nature, or is there some heterosexual?
They start off with the wild secretaries. It's kind of, you know, my husband did those in Indonesia. He did them at a place in Northern Virginia with his first wife.
She was told by military leaders and their wives that this is normal.
What percentage do you think of these higher-up people are bisexual?
Oh, all of them. If they're in special operations, if they're Marines, they're all bisexuals. They've all had to do it in order to get to be a bird colonel. The SEALs, it's kind of like the fast road to the top. Now.
So a guy could not be a SEAL without having.
Oh, I don't believe so. Mm. I haven't met one that I don't believe would have done it. And judging from what a couple of colonels told me, it's just, that's the norm. It's just you women, you know, y'all are so sissy, y'all are just, you know, you don't understand how it is. We're under so much pressure. And when Valerie Wilhelm told me that about Charlie, I just could not believe what
Charlie Wilhelm would be a...
He's a general now down in Miami. And she was just saying, oh, well, you know, he's run around. He has to, she said. He's under so much pressure. And I just, and she was saying that, of course, I had met Charlie in Norway, and Charlie is sort of someone my husband just idolizes. And and Michael O'Boyle is another one. Michael is my husband's special friend.
After watching all 8 hours of her interview, when I see a top government official, I find myself wondering, did this guy get his promotion because he joined in on the homosexual sex? What about this guy? Or him? This one? Do the Air Force generals do it also? Kay Griggs implies that General Al Gray enjoys the homosexual sex, but I would expect some of the men to become fed up with it after a certain number of years. After all, how many times would you have to be pressured into homosexual acts before you refused to do it? Whoever has control of the U.S. government has to deal with the men who become rebellious. Kay Griggs suspects that murder was used to keep her husband under control.
And you see, my husband is frightened to death. I believe that his brother was murdered to keep him in, because he had gone through 4 years of this mind control. And the man who did it, you can see this on the video, his name was Charles Caddick, and another man named Alexander Robinson.
She also suspects other people were murdered, such as former CIA Director William Colby. She also mentions the technique of condemning a person to a mental institution, which almost happened to a person named Bob.
There were a couple of others, Paisley, who was murdered almost like this other man. Paisley was murdered like William Colby. Paisley was also hanging around with homosexuals. He went to the Rush River Lodge. That is the one. So did Bob Woodward. Bob Woodward, you know.
The reporter?
Yeah. Henry Kissinger was a well-known, totally a homosexual, not even both ways.
And so his wife is a marriage of
oh, it's just a convenience. Yeah, and he might, you know, maybe he's discovered women in his late age, I don't know. But no, I heard through a very well-grounded German that Henry's best friend's father told Henry to stay away from him, and that's why Henry left. The family were embarrassed, and Henry went to Britain, where they did this, and then changed his name from Heinz to Henry. And I interviewed a man named Bob, who's an Army enlisted person who told me about Henry in Cambodia. So he, up through Cambodia, he was actually raping young men. And of course, that experience destroyed the lives of these 5 young men, according to the source. I mean, he said he was crying, and this man was a perfectly wonderful, functioning, young married man who worked for a newspaper on the Eastern Shore and had 3 young children, went to Vietnam as an enlisted man, was put in Cambodia, which he said it was a lie living there, and then ran into Henry Kissinger, or Henry Kissinger ran into him and did certain things to him, invited him into his tent with some other men. It was horrible, but it was, you know, he said it's wartime and so forth. But he said, you know, I could have taken it mentally if it had been a bunkmate or something. But he said when it's someone like Henry Kissinger who does it to you, you're ruined. He said, I could never, he said he came back home. Oh, and this is interesting, and I really believe that Bob's right. He said, Kissinger said to him, if you ever tell anybody, if you ever mention a soul, it's the end of you. Don't you ever tell anybody. Well, when he got back, when Bob got back, he went to a special hospital, and they were going to keep him locked up forever.
Bob?
Bob. A lot of the other boys just, you know, my feeling is that he was flagged the way I was flagged when General Gray and, you know, Wilhelm had me flagged because I broke up the go-go dancing in the officers' club. I was labeled a troublemaker because I thought it was wrong for married men to be going out with topless go-go dancers in the officers' club dining room, and I took pictures of it, and my husband, you know, got really mad and so forth.
How could it be that all top government officials are willing to allow this corruption, rape, and blackmail? Kay Griggs says that the people in control of the government are grooming emotionally weak boys for top government positions. She explains that this recruitment process starts while the boys are teenagers or younger.
They have little boys that they pick out, and they call them special. They use the word special, meaning elite, irregular, in order to entice these boys because they don't have much ego.
They look for boys who are suffering from low self-esteem, poverty, and mental disorders. People who are not happy with themselves are easy to manipulate with praise, and children from poor families are more susceptible to promises of top government positions. She explains that some of these boys are put into all-boys schools and exposed to homosexual activities. She accuses a man named Charles Caddock of being one of the men who manipulated the young boys.
Charles Caddock was the bodyguard, quote-unquote teacher for these guys. So they would go out and play in the woods, and they were doing homosexual things with them.
She investigated her husband's background and believes that these people were pushing him into homosexual activities.
I called all these roommates at the Hun School and at Princeton. They told me things about George and, you know, holding hands with, you know, with Caddock and other people, about being a cheerleader and going off and so forth.
Yeah, a cheerleader. This is a kind of a trade name, right?
No, he was a cheerleader for
at Princeton.
At Princeton,
okay.
And he traveled with the football team.
Okay.
And here is a guy like that. They put him in the Marine Corps. I don't think that was very nice. Do you know what I'm saying? It was hard for him.
She believes that President Bill Clinton was also selected for this program of abuse and blackmail.
You know, as you describe this, I can't help but think of Bill Clinton.
Well, of course he was. He was one of those profile boys. But the difference between Bill Clinton, and I'm not saying Bill Clinton's better, but Bill Clinton did not go, he didn't know anything about the assassinations.
How would you feel if you had been put into an all-boys school when you were a teenager, subjected to homosexual sex, and offered high-level government jobs? When you rebelled, your brother was murdered. Kay described her husband as drinking every day. He would often pass out on the floor and even in the yard. Sometimes he would sit naked in his room. His attitude was often unpleasant, and he was sometimes very violent. You might think that a government official could hold a press conference and complain about the corruption, but unless he is given support by other government officials and the American people, he will meet the same fate as the other people who resisted. On page 149 of my book, Painful Questions, An Analysis of the September 11th Attack, I have a section, There is Nobody to Protect Us. I wrote, "More amazing to me, we cannot even get support from the American citizens. Rather, most of them will insult us as being conspiracy nuts. This situation reminds me of the child who ran away from Jeff Dahmer, went to the police for help, and the police handed him back to Dahmer. How is America going to improve when the majority of American citizens, including the police, FBI, and military, have no desire to know what is going on in their nation and have no desire to help make the nation better?